Hello, I'm Chelmsford Town Manager Paul Cohen, and welcome to the April 2018 edition of the Town Managers Roundtable. Since we're at town meeting season, the topic of our program this evening will be the town meeting warrant, and we'll cover some of the major articles on this annual town meeting. And so I'm joined, as usual, by my assistant, Colleen Stansfield.
How are you?
Who's a town meeting representative.
Yep.
And longtime resident and former town official. And we're also joined by Mike Raisbeck, who's on the planning board, veteran planning board member.
Yes.
That's the best way to say this at this point in time. And Mike, why don't we sort of start with you in terms of zoning, because there are 31 articles on the warrant, but I think the ones that may generate some discussion have to do with zoning, and they obviously have to do with housing aspects of zoning. So if you would just sort of pick it up from there.
Okay, well, there are two items on the warrant that concern zoning that the zoning board has had a look at. One of them is Article 25. This is just some minor changes in wording to make clear exactly what our business amenities overlay district means. It does not change, as far as we can tell, what the bylaw is at all. It's strictly housekeeping. We had one proponent come in before the board. It wasn't completely clear on what the language meant. We figured it was a good time to clean it up. Okay. And I don't think there's anything particularly earth-shaking about that.
And that article is sponsored by the planning board.
That is sponsored by the planning board,
Okay.
and obviously we have
Recommending
we voted to recommend it. Yes.
So it's really a housekeeping kind of article to make clarity on some
Exactly.
concerns.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so I
So there's
don't,
no substantive changes to the zoning in the community. Okay.
I got to say the more interesting one
Yep.
is Article 26. This is a citizens petition article that's been put forward, and what it would do would change some of the residential housing density allowed basically along Turnpike Road on the 129 industrial area. I think to discuss, well, I will say up front that the zoning board have voted not to recommend. But I think it behooves us to give a good explanation of why. So let me go back and do a little history.
Yeah, okay.
Please do.
That area up on 129, the so-called 129 industrial area, was made industrially zoned, I believe, back in the 50s. I keep hearing the number 1956. Now, I was around, but I was only 7 years old.
Okay.
I suspect most of the people that live up on Turnpike Road hadn't even been thought of yet.
Okay.
But this is when the town was beginning to realize that it had to control some of its development, and they decided that this was a good area for industrial development. Industrial meaning not necessarily factories, although it could be that, but more likely office buildings and things of that sort. And of course, Route 3 was coming in at the time, and it was clear that this spot where Route 3 and whatever was going to become 495 meet, it had the potential to become kind of a hub for this sort of thing. So the town decided to do that. And that runs up from 129 up all the way to Turnpike Road. And there's some little corners to it as well that you can find on the maps. For a variety of reasons, there never really was huge development on the Turnpike Road side. And so the neighborhoods up there actually were somewhat fortunate for 50 or 60 years, 60 I think, that there really wasn't a lot of development up there. But there could have been.
Despite the name Turnpike Road.
Yeah, despite the name Turnpike Road, yeah. It's actually fairly small for a turnpike. So now we fast forward to a couple of years ago. We had the Economic Development Committee with Don Van Dyne. We had Evan Belansky, our Community Development Director. And they all started looking very carefully, and you as well, Paul, started looking very carefully at why that area seemed to be languishing. There was development up there. There were buildings up there. There were office buildings up there. There were also contractor yards up there and kind of low uses that don't generate much revenue and don't generate much in the way of jobs. the question was, what can we do about this? And it was realized, and I think it's an enlightened realization, that the methods, the modes of operation have changed. I work with a bunch of millennials now, and these kids want to work, play, and live in the same kind of area. And so we developed the Business Amenities Overlay District as an overlay on top of this space to encourage some of the live and play aspects that we felt, and I think quite rightly so, would help develop this area. In doing that, the zoning board was quite conscious of the fact that you probably didn't want to have a strip mall on Turnpike Road, so we put some limitations on it, such that that was not likely to ever be commercial, although it could still be industrial. But we allowed for, by appropriate permitting and special permits, some fairly substantial residential development, multifamily development, which I think would help the cause. Okay, that's where we stand. And what we have.
And since that time, you have had an application in that area.
Yeah, we've had applications. We've had lots of interest.
Right.
Clearly, what the EDC and Evan thought up and what we put into motion in the zoning board was the right way to go. It's got a lot of interest.
Right, and you've had two applications for residential multifamily housing on Turnpike Road, one of which was withdrawn, and the major one of 164 units was approved.
Which we went through and it was
168.
approved. And let me point out, it was not a 40B.
Right.
No, it wasn't. It's,
So
it's our deterrent to 40B.
It's our exactly. It's our
So-
deterrent for 40B, and I'll get back to that one in a
Okay.
minute because that's a
Okay.
very important point.
It is.
Okay, this article that's been presented and that we will see in town meeting is an article to basically reduce the zoning density down to that's allowed along Turnpike Road down to 4 to 6 units per acre.
And I think that's actually needs to be clarified. I think
Yeah.
it's not only the Turnpike
Yeah.
Road, it's under the whole BAOD.
Well, it's under the whole BAOD, but that's the area that it's probably
That
most
they're
applicable to.
targeting,
In
yeah.
fact, part of the problem is we don't completely understand
Correct.
what this article does, and I understand that there may be some changes presented to it. But in any case, the idea of reducing
Density.
the housing density creates some problems, some substantial problems. The first problem it creates is that that's not enough housing for people to live where they work and play. It just isn't. I mean, 4 to 6 is nice, and we can always use a little bit of housing, but that's not going to help very much. The second problem with that is that up in that area, with the kind of development you see up there, for example, you have the Mill Road 40B, you've got 104 Turnpike, that's the kind of development, or things more like that, are what are going to turn out to be financially sensible for a developer to do. I think you're going to have a hard time getting a developer coming in there and just putting in 4 units on an acre. I just don't think it's going to pay.
Correct, but it's also the kind of housing that the planning board envisioned
Yeah,
in
oh,
doing
it's-
this.
yeah.
So it,
So, and the third, well, it's the third part of it, and you alluded to this earlier, is that it offers no protection against a 40B. And there's a lot of land up there that could be turned into 40B development. Now, when a 40B development comes in, we lose all control.
correct.
Right now, with the bylaws the way they are, we can look at a project, and we did this on 104. And we said, well, you know, you could put some trees over here, and we'd like you to move the entrance around. And we can do that and take that tall building you have in the front and move it to the back where people aren't going to see it so much. We have a lot of leverage now under the bylaws, and particularly under the BAOD, to get developers to make the kind of changes that are going to make a project more attractive to the neighborhood, to the town, to everybody.
And just a note on
Yeah.
top of that is under the COID,
Yeah.
which is sort of connected
Underneath
to
the
this.
BAOD.
Yes, which is connected to the
Yeah.
whole thing. There is a higher standard
Yeah.
of architecture
Much higher.
and plantings and whatnot, which we would not get with a
Yeah,
40B.
And the zoning board regularly applies those higher standards. We did it on 104, we've done it on other projects. If we were to pass this warrant article,
40B.
I think basically what you're going to get is a 40B up there. And, okay, we may be close, the town is close now to making its 10% affordable housing criteria.
Requirement,
But we're not there yet. I mean, it hasn't been made official. Until that happens, somebody can come in with an application tomorrow, and we would have no control.
And frankly, what it brings is, we want the multifamily there,
Right.
you know, to add to, and then we want the commercial. So the commercial has been, you know, only the multifamily is allowed
Yeah.
on Turnpike. There's a commercial exclusion zone.
Right,
So
exactly.
the underlying zoning, the industrial, can still be built there, which, next to a
And
residential.
And honestly, that was our attempt to give some accommodation to the neighborhood that's up there now.
Exactly,
We
a
figure
buffer.
if you've got industrial and you've got residential, probably the best kind of buffer you can have between those is higher density residential. We've kept the commercial out, and by making it an attractive place to put residential, we'll effectively keep the industrial out. I mean, you could have a 250,000 square foot office building with 3,000 people in its parking lot up there. And it could essentially do it by right. You'd need certain permits, but you'd get the permits almost automatically. So I think what we have got on the books right now is probably the best protection that we can offer to the neighborhood up on Turnpike Road.
And just to add
Yeah.
the end of that, I think that the amenities that are being asked for, the residential seems to
Yeah.
be coming first.
Right.
You know, so hopefully with the residential to support some commercial business over there, those will come in.
Well, remember, there's already been talk. Now, we haven't got anything clearly laid down and permitted yet, but there's been plenty of interest up there.
Oh, yes.
On 129. So I have no doubt that 129 area is going to develop much the way the EDC and Evan and you.
It's also
envisioned it.
it's also envisioned what the market's happening,
Yeah.
because if you look at our neighboring communities,
Yeah.
that's what's going in. Westford has it on 110.
Littleton even.
Littleton has it.
Burlington's got some pieces of this.
Lowell,
Everybody-
I mean,
yeah.
it's the demand for housing now seems to be rental housing, apartments, and they want to be near the interstates. or
Right.
the
They want to be near
highways.
the interstate. They
This
want
is
to
a
be near
great
the-
And they want
spot.
live, work, play, exactly.
Yeah, live, work, play.
And the ability to, to have everything sort of centrally located.
Yeah.
And
And at the point, we were losing
Yeah.
big companies there because we couldn't
well, there's no
house them.
amenities. The problem is
There was no amenities.
And that's what they wanted.
We had lost Kronos, we've lost Mercury.
Mercury, yeah.
And
There's others that are,
there-
leases are upcoming
leases,
soon.
yeah,
and
exactly. We have to get that place pumped up, and I don't think that this warrant article is the way to do it. That's why the zoning board voted to not approve.
Great, thank you, Mike.
Sure.
Sticking on sort of the petition articles and land use themes, the other petition article has to do with the use of the 101 Mill Road property.
Yeah.
And the petition is to have it used as an historic inn. And now, I guess, as you said, that's evolving as well. They seem to want to delay the disposition of the property at least until the fall. Again, nothing has been submitted, so
Yeah.
it's kind of hard for the planning board or the community to react to what's being proposed there, other than there's this desire to find an investor who would develop an inn. The challenge that they'll have there, because as you may know, we went to town meeting, got some money, did extensive studies with the previous committee. It's the code issues.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got,
Yeah.
that was a residential structure that was occupied by the Merrimack Educational Collaborative, because that's an exempt use under
Right.
the state zoning law. But in essence, it's a house.
Right.
And therefore, it doesn't have the safety amenities that are required in a resident, in a structure that occupies commercial loads. Fire alarm systems, exits,
Electrical wiring, probably, everything.
ADA accessibility and so
Right.
forth. So it's a big challenge, but that's the request they're going to bring for.
But the other half of that, Paul, is that the inn is already allowed under zoning.
Right, I guess it's considered
It's a
like
boarding
a boarding
house.
house type of thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so it's really not a zoning article because it hasn't.
It
been-
really isn't.
I think it's a practical and financial thing. I think it would be a wonderful use if somebody can find a way to get in there and make a go of it.
Right.
I
Right.
just don't know if that's going to happen.
It's probably a limited scale bed and breakfast
Yeah.
type of thing, if anything could go there.
the only other concern I have with that one is in delaying this, because board already voted to sell it, correct?
The town meeting authorized this disposition.
Right, so in delaying it and focusing for a particular sale, doesn't that sort of defeat the open bid process?
Well, it may diminish the market value for the property. That's what would be remain to be seen. Because if you just sell it to the market at highest price, then there may be greater uses, probably residential, obviously there, than would be for a bed and breakfast or inn type of facility. So, the other petitioned article, final one, has to do with conflict of interest.
Yeah.
And I think being town meeting members, you sort of know where this arose from.
Right.
And what this is attempting to do is put in a requirement that one would have to disclose a conflict of interest, and then if you're found to have violated it, you have to give a public disclosure at a subsequent town meeting, almost like a public shaming.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
I was
And then
thinking to
notation.
put them in the stock.
Yeah,
You know?
because under the state's ethics law, town meeting representatives, including representative town meeting representatives, are not subject to the open meeting law.
Right.
So this is basically saying, well, we can have local standards that are greater. Any thoughts on whether this is necessary or sort of, I mean, like we said, we sort of know where this is arising from.
You know, I am a fan of good rules covering conflict of interest. I have had some experience, though, on one board that I serve on, of a very complex conflict of interest, I don't know, 4-page chunk of policy being enacted by that board, and then having that board find out that there were all kinds of unintended consequences and misinterpretations of what this meant. So I'm a little bit wary, but, you know,
We'll go there and listen.
I'm all for transparency, too.
I frankly am against it. I think, the town meeting reps are left with no conflict for a reason.
Yeah.
And you start asking people to disclose, I mean, who knows? You could be accused of it at some point, and you really weren't aware of whatever conflict that really could have been there. I just don't think it's a good idea.
Well, I think something that's worth considering
Yeah.
is, would you apply this to a non-representative town meeting? Could you?
No.
No, you couldn't.
No.
I mean, the idea of a representative town meeting, which I love,
Yeah.
because it's got all the advantages of open town meeting and very few of the disadvantages.
Right.
But if you're not going to apply it to that, maybe you shouldn't apply
But
it.
most oftentimes when people speak and they have an interest, they give a disclosure.
They do.
Like, look, I'm the attorney for this party, or
Right.
I'm the investor,
Or
I'm the
I live
applicant.
next door, I'm the abutter.
Exactly,
you know.
so
Yeah, I
And
get
there
all
was
that.
disclosure in the last one,
so we'll see.
The
last one has to do with land use, has to do with street acceptances, and
Oh, yeah.
and I think it's worth mentioning because I think when people see the list, they're going to say,
Yeah, well, that was
"What
not
are we doing?" But
Hunt Road.
Hunt Road, Elm Street,
Robin Hill.
Lock Road, Park Road, Parker Road. This is basically another housekeeping thing
Yeah.
where these roads have never been brought before the state for acceptance. And the reason for that is if you get it accepted as a public way, you then get some of your gas tax, which comes in the form of Chapter 90
90
statutory
funds.
funds to the community. So that's what's
Right.
taking place
Yeah, and
here.
I think people should understand that it does absolutely nothing, has absolutely no impact on the rights of the people that abut that road.
Right.
It doesn't change their rights or their
Right,
ownership at all.
It's right. It's not a scenic road bylaw.
It's not a scenic
we did one of
road
those last
bylaw,
year.
and it doesn't take their land or
Right.
force
Right.
or force.
No, the right of way.
The right of way is what it
Steve
is.
explained,
Is what it is.
It's
Yeah.
variable.
So it's just basically accepting
Yeah.
it publicly, which technically the legal aspect of it is it then makes the town legally responsible for the maintenance.
Now, we've been
here.
plowing these things for 100 years,
But technically,
but- yeah.
communities have the option of not plowing,
Right.
and maintaining.
So I think this is a good thing.
Ways open to, so that one's good. And then there are a few other miscellaneous ones that have to. The Disabilities Commission has submitted an article to require the
Large
painting
print?
well they want
oh,
on land
this
use.
is- I'm sorry.
This has to do with parking spaces.
Parking space.
They want to better identify the handicap parking spaces by requiring them to be painted that OSHA blue. as opposed to just the sign.
Well,
So
that's
again,
just
well
fine by me, but after a New England winter,
you
what
might not
do
see
you
it anyway.
you know?
Right, you'll have to be out there every spring.
yeah.
And the beauty of this is it's only when they need to be repainted.
Right.
So it doesn't have to happen
Oh,
right
no,
away.
that's
So,
happening. They
it's
just
kind of a
want-
no-brainer.
It's a good one. And then their other one is the large font menus. That
Right,
they,
right.
they want to have business establishments be required to have 16-point large font
You know, I'm
menus.
getting to the age where I wouldn't mind that.
And I think their intent is that, as much as you can say, oh, well, we can assist you, your waiter or wait person or waitress or whatever would assist you, the idea is people want to be independent.
Right,
And so therefore, they want to have a large menu because otherwise they don't want to be like this, and so so I think that's the intent of what they're
And
trying
it's
to
not like with modern word processing software, you can't do it in a couple of minutes.
Well, they'd probably be easier just having cheaters at the table.
yeah, right.
do. Exactly.
So,
So that's what's going on there. We have some other miscellaneous things I want to touch on in our last 10 minutes or so. There is in terms of community improvements, there is a request before community preservation to basically rehabilitate, renovate, replace the Byam School elementary school playground. So there's a $75,000 request there for funds, and the PTO will be also supporting it. So that's another
It's a
positive.
matching fund.
Matching fund at the
Yeah.
Byam,
that'll be
which
good.
which is very popular. It's off the rail trail.
and it's what CPC likes to see.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's CPC. So that's a good one. And in fact, speaking of that, at the beginning of town meeting, see, I segue these things. We will hear a report from the Roberts Field Committee
Yep.
in terms of the progress they've had, because that playground is scheduled to be completed by the end of June, early
Yeah.
July. And so they gave some presentations to the Finance Committee and the Selectmen, and they're out selling bricks. For those interested and for fundraising, and they're coming in, and they have it's an impressive plan. And quite frankly, I think one can clearly see that once that playground is completed, it's going to be very popular.
Oh, yeah.
It's going,
Yeah.
much like we get popularity at Hart Pond and Varney and so forth. This is going to be another, the dog park. This is another going to be a very popular draw in the
Right.
community.
Yeah, definitely a go-to place.
Yeah.
Well,
so-
it's also not affiliated with school, so younger kids can go there during
Right.
the day, so
during-
it's important.
Exactly. So that one. A couple other things just to touch upon. Also the EDC, sort of going back to the 129 zoning, they'll be giving a report at the beginning of the meeting about their 129 branding and marketing program. So that will cover the beginning of the meeting. But the big thrust of the town meeting has to do with finances. This is the budget town meeting.
Right.
It's the spring town meeting. And I, as town manager in the form of the charter, I'm bringing forth a budget to the community that's been recommended by the planning board, and the selectmen will make their recommendations after the election, going into town meeting. Basically, the aspects of it are most notably the school's budget. The school's budget this year would be $59 million. It's a $2 million increase, or about 3.5%. There will be some, restoration or enhancements in programs. They will be adding another curriculum coordinator that was cut back going back to the recession period. They will also be adding half-time principals at the elementary schools. They'll also be adding a elementary therapeutic learning program, which I think they've got really excited about in the program. And then there's some nursing and staffing professional position changes. The interesting to note there is right now, the last data we have, which was not this school year, but the last school year, the average cost throughout the K through 12 Chelmsford school system to educate a student was $14,610. Not insignificant.
No.
So it's basically double the tax bill. So
Yeah.
so it's
And I got
because I
3
think
kids.
sometimes realize, we're running the proposed budget's 132 million.
Yeah.
And for the first time, it's within the levy limit, and for the first time, we're crossing the $100 million property tax threshold. We will be assessing over $100 million in property taxes for the upcoming year. But then I was thinking about it. We're sort of the largest commercial operation in the community. Just on the general government side, we have 245 employees.
Wow.
Full-time equivalent employees, and then obviously the schools, more than double that. We're maintaining 26 buildings, and the question becomes, the average single-family tax bill, as we all know, is 7175. That's a whole nother discussion in terms of, how that bill is created, but we'll leave that to other programs and debates. But the big driver in this obviously has to do with employees. I mean, we're not a manufacturer, we're a service provider. And as part of that service provider, we expend $12.2 million in health insurance for active employees and retirees. So that basically means 1 out of every $11 goes towards health insurance premiums. We also then take $8 million and put it to the retirement system, of which $6.8 million of that goes to fund the unfunded pension liability that was left by our predecessors, because we still have a $96 million unfunded pension liability for the community that at this funding level would be paid off in less than 20 years by 2035. So that's significant. We're also funding the Neshoba Valley Technical Regional School District. Their budget assessment for the town of Chelmsford for this upcoming year is $3 million. We have 198 students from Chelmsford that attend Neshoba Tech. We basically send 30% of the student population at Neshoba Tech, so we're obviously the largest community.
sending, right.
And just to give these numbers in terms of again, the last school year, because we're in the middle of one, but the last school year, the average cost per pupil, basically you take the budget divided by the number of students in there, was $19,238.
At the tech.
At the tech. I mean, it's significant. I mean, obviously, if you've got children at college age or follow what's going on, costs are significant. And it's. And you know what? That's the lowest cost technical high school in the state.
Yeah.
So and the reason it's higher than the public schools is because they're only educating grades 9 through 12.
Right.
And it's a technical system.
Right.
So because in a public school system, your lower cost students are your elementary students.
Right.
Kindergarten, grades K through 5. When you get up to the high school with the whole diversity of activities and classes and so forth, it's more expensive. So again, the town meeting will be asked to fund the Neshoba district. We have a $3.3 million capital budget. Probably the most noteworthy and most expensive thing is we're going to resurface the high school parking lot, rear portion, basically by the stadium and all behind the back of the
little
building.
deep back there, yeah.
It's basically, we determined most of it's original, back to '74. And you look at it now, there isn't a lot left. So that's a major cost. There'll also be some parking lot and curbing improvements here at the Parker School where we're taping, which is needed as well. There's some high-tech stuff. The police are going to be installing a microwave radio network as part of their communication systems. And you say, well, why are we doing that? And that's because, if people are aware of it,
Power outages.
but also Verizon's doing away with copper line.
Yeah.
There is no copper line. So the idea, if you had a power outage, your fiber would go down. And so you'd have an inability so the most effective, cost-effective way, believe it or not, is to install microwave. So when this is approved, they would install a microwave dish at the fire tower. And believe it or not, we'd actually have one at the Cross Point in Lowell and a couple other locations.
Oh.
Probably up on the, do you think they have one up on High Street there?
On High Street, yeah.
Up on
So
the
on the
tank?
tank, yeah. So this is the ability to get effective communication. We're also doing some, replacing the senior center roof, some technology in the schools. So, we'll talk about, we wanted to touch upon that. And then the other thing, we're in closing, a couple other good things to note, because we don't want to just have, disturbing news is we are funding the sewer operations this year, and the sewer operation budget is now $3.9 million. And the good news is this will be the third year. We're going to a third year without a rate increase.
Yeah.
So
That's
things are
impressive.
stable there. We are, in a separate article, using some of the sewer fund cash to do some pump upgrades at Milan Avenue and Weston Avenue. So that's going well. And then this is the first year where we're now the owner and operator of the Chelmsford Forum.
Yeah.
So we'll be approving that. That budget's $110 million, but again, that's not on the tax levy because the management company pays the lease. And those lease revenues offset the costs and operations of the forum, much like we do with the golf course.
Right.
So those are a couple of things to note. So we have 1 minute to closing. Any closing thoughts towards town meeting? Or?
Well, I don't know. Does anybody want to make a prediction how many nights it's going to go?
It should be a one-nighter, I think,
I
but
think it should be a
it won't
two-nighter.
be.
I'm thinking 3.
I'm thinking
So we'll see. I mean, there's 31 articles, and there will be a limitation, so this will help.
Yeah.
The moderator has informed me he will limit presenters to only 10 minutes
Okay.
for a presentation, and then as we know from the last time, there'll be a countdown clock. They will limit speakers to 5 minutes, and I think that's the way of making
Yeah, I
it
think
efficient.
that's where we're
And honestly, as a presenter, if you can't get your point across within 10 minutes,
You've lost
lost
them.
lost them
everybody,
anyway.
yeah.
So
They
that's
start-
our goal. So again, we remind folks the spring annual town meeting is Tuesday, April 30th, 7:30 p.m. It'll continue to 11, and it'll go Thursday and Mondays afterwards until it's completed. Thank you.
Okay, thank
Thank you,
you.
Mike. Thank you, Colleen.